Has the relationship between India and United States of America broken down, or has it gone back to the era when we were uncertain about each other, 1970s, or some say 1998? Or is it just a bargaining tool which is being used by President Trump when he talks about tariffs on India, which some other people are calling as penalty on India, when he meets with Russian president, when he has now appointed an ambassador to India, but unusually he has also made that ambassador as a special envoy for this region. And does that mean that he is again trying to relink India Pakistan when in actuality there is no connect between India and Pakistan in the global stage, our economic power, our military power, or any other factor? So, what is happening between India, United States? What are the challenges for India? How India has to navigate that vis-a-vis what India is trying to now do with China, because India is, in a sense, trying to restart the relationship with China on a different footing, which had obviously gone into the doldrums after what happened in Galwan. So, to discuss all this, we have with us former Foreign Secretary of India, Mr. Kanwal Sibal. Thank you, sir, for joining.
My pleasure.
So, if I may start with the Alaska meet, before I come to the tariffs, that meeting happened, and you tweeted on that also that after talking to Zelensky and European leaders, Trump says it was determined by all that the best way to end the horrific war between Russia and Ukraine is to go directly to a peace agreement, which would end the war and not mere a ceasefire agreement. And this read with how all the European leaders sat down as if students in a school did some mischief and the principal has summoned them, and which was a very humiliating image, which probably has become one of the most globally spread image. So what do you think is Trump's end goal with Ukraine and Russia before we come to India?
Well, he's been saying all along that he wants to end the conflict in Ukraine. And this is kind of an obsession with him. He has uh, held Biden responsible for this war and was saying, during his campaign and soon after he took over, that but for Biden's mistakes, this war wouldn't have started. And if he was there, it wouldn't have happened. And within 2 days, he's going to solve it. But that has not happened. But the short point is that he is making an effort. He appointed a special envoy, Witkov, who who went and met Putin several times. He's been himself in telephonic contact with Putin, and then they thought that they had prepared the ground sufficiently for the two principals to meet in Alaska, which was quite a bold move. Now, all this was happening uh, over the heads of both the Europeans and the Ukrainians because they felt that they were being left out. And since Ukraine was the central issue in this, so Zelensky felt that how can his fate be decided or Ukraine's fate be decided without he being party to these, direct party to these discussions and negotiations. And the Europeans took the line that it's an issue of European security. And if Russia wins in Ukraine, then the fallout of that on European security would be dire. And therefore, Russia has to be stopped. And Russia can be stopped only if there's Western unity, and Europe must be part of these discussions. And that Europe, irrespective of what Trump does, will continue to support Ukraine with arms and funds, which they are doing. Now, the Alaska meeting, as I said, obviously couldn't have happened unless the basics of the meeting had been carefully prepared by both sides and the positions of the two sides well known. Except that, except that, when you have an intermediary like Witkov, who's not a seasoned diplomat, in fact, he's not a diplomat, he's a businessman, and the issue is so utterly complex, and you need a lot of experience, not only dealing with Russia, but also understanding what the historical context is and all the other baggage around this conflict, which is emotional, religious, territorial, historical, or what have you. So to me, it seems that whatever Witkov may have done would not have actually prepared sufficient ground for a true meeting of minds between Trump and Putin. And that's why Rubio also said that Trump wants to meet Putin to size him up personally at Alaska, to understand directly what his thinking and everything else is, which then explains why he went back entirely on what he was saying earlier, tom-tomming the ceasefire thing and claiming that he had been successful in establishing ceasefires all over the world, and he needed 6, 7 Nobel Prizes for that, and especially in our context. He, in fact, has created huge problems in our relationship by focusing on his role in in establishing a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. And suddenly he says that no, ceasefire sort of they can't hold and they can be broken. So it's best that we go to directly to a peace agreement, which is precisely what the Russians have been saying, and which is sensible. This is a sensible approach. The Europeans are very unhappy because they had the entire diplomacy built on ceasefire, and this is true also of Zelensky, because they wanted a ceasefire to release pressure on them to be able to regroup, uh, get fill up whatever points of weakness that they have on the front, more weapons, more arms, etc., etc. They needed this breathing space, so therefore they were egging for a ceasefire and making it a humanitarian issue. A lot of killings are taking place. The killing must stop, and this and that. So that way, Trump is right in going to directly to a peace agreement. However, the problem here is that the Russian conditions for a peace agreement and what Trump and Europeans and Zelensky can give in return is still is far apart in crucial ways. Of course, in terms of NATO membership, Trump has agreed no NATO membership for Ukraine. Insofar as uh, uh, you know limits to the Russian to the Ukrainian armed forces is concerned, there is no clarity. With regard to territorial exchanges, Russia has raised the ante to say that the whole of Donbass, because pockets of Donbass, especially Donetsk, which are critical, are not in Russian control. And if they come under Russian control, frankly, the entire front of Ukraine collapses, because they have built up such strong defenses that it has taken over a year for Russia not to be able to penetrate them. As against this, I don't know what Russia can give, because they talk of exchange of territories, maybe something in Sumy, something in Kharkiv region in the north, which Russia will gladly give up. But there is no way that Russia can give any other territory, because all these 4 provinces, uh, erstwhile Ukraine, have been made an integral part through a referendum and a constitutional amendment of Russia. Now, if he were to agree to a kind of a swap with bits of territory which he hasn't occupied, Russia hasn't occupied, are given to Ukraine, or a sort of line is drawn there, then it's a constitutional problem for Russia. Then they have to amend the constitution.
So
So these
basically,
are difficult issues ahead.
the basic problem which comes is, firstly, European view of having a ceasefire is looks like it's out of the window if President Trump and President Putin say whatever is done has to be done finally, because ceasefire will not last every 2 months. No point in that. But that final agreement is very difficult, especially with regard to territory, because Russia owns some territory. But so this entire thing, India suddenly became a big player because US decided India should not buy oil from Russia, and if it buys oil from Russia, it is going to impose tariffs. And that situation has spiraled out of control, in the sense it appears. So, what do you think, sir? Because Trump came saying China is its biggest threat, China has taken away manufacturing. In any scenario in which you have to counter China, India has to have a sufficient role, because of global manufacturing needs to go to some country with a reasonably low cost. US can't afford to manufacture. It's just not price sensitive to manufacturing. So, what has happened to Trump and all his, in a sense, cabinet members, his supporters? that suddenly a campaign has been lost against India, not only on tariffs. You see on their media, you see on their social media, that entire broad campaign which is launched nowadays on social media along with policy, one sees that happening. So what is happening in the US mind or India?
Well, it all began by Trump's obsession with the high Indian tariffs. He's been calling India the king of tariffs. He did that even when our prime minister was there in February. Uh, it was a very good meeting. The joint statement was excellent, full of substance. But even then, he kept calling India a tariff king. He didn't relent on that. And then he had this, tariff policy of imposing tariffs on the entire world, even countries with which the US doesn't even trade, small countries there and there, and and the uh, and the tariffs figures had no rationality at all. But this was his way of wrecking the entire global trading system, especially the WTO, uh, and forcing, because of the uh, fact that the United States economy is the biggest in the world, the US market is the biggest in the world. Everybody wants to be able to export to the US market. He felt that if he raises tariffs, uh, this will compel other countries to open up their economies more in order to enter into negotiations with the United States to lower their own tariffs, and then persuade uh, Trump to lower the figures that he had initially, at the bargaining chip, announced. Uh, and then, of course, he's been saying that all these tariffs are bringing in a lot of money into the system and etc. You know what the arguments are.
Mm.
Now, on India, we were having a discussion on an interim deal. We had 5 rounds of discussions, plus a lot of other virtual online discussions between the two sides. And an agreement was reached, which I understand was pretty good. And we made a lot of concessions. And the USTR people were reasonably happy with what had been agreed to. And this was put up to Trump. But Trump did not approve it because he wanted a bigger and a deeper uh, agreement with the, as I think the USTR said, that we have put it up to Trump, but Trump says that everything should be opened up, or almost everything should be opened up.
Mm.
Uh, Now, I had anticipated that he would take this line frankly, and I had put this on X also, that with the kind of agreement that is extracted from the Europeans and from the Japanese, which is utterly one-sided, his tail is up, and he's going to become very difficult with us, which is what happened. And uh, they want to break open our agriculture sector and our dairy sector. Lutnick is very negative towards India, and they're all there to please and flatter Trump and follow in his wake and do exactly what he wants. So he then decided to impose 25% tariffs on India, higher than what has been imposed on Pakistan or Vietnam or many of our competitors, or etc., even Bangladesh. Uh, and then he broadened the attack on India and made it political. It has nothing to do with tariffs anymore, but it was part of his policy of putting pressure on Putin, because he knew that the negotiations with Putin were coming, and therefore he had to be in a position where he could threaten
Mm.
Putin uh, with secondary sanctions on his biggest importers of oil, Russia, India, and China. So this was a handle he wanted to use, and he announced a penalty of an additional 25% on India uh, because we continue to buy oil and also defense equipment from Russia. Now, here the bad faith of Trump. Now, if it is a question of applying sanctions on or threatening Russia with sanctions and affecting their oil revenues by imposing secondary sanctions on a country like India, which is buying a lot of oil now. But why is he bringing in the defense thing? Why is he bringing in the defense thing? So it's a wider, become a wider geopolitical uh, game. He's so miffed with India. He's made it rather personal. personal because we 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 sort of questioned his claims that he was not only responsible for the ceasefire but used a trade weapon to force us to
Mm,
agree to a ceasefire, and he
mm,
kept repeating that. He's repeated it about 28, 29 times. And then I think it's that when our prime minister and he had a talk when our prime minister was in Canada,
mm.
I understand that our prime minister, quite rightly, made our concerns known, not only with regard to ceasefire, but also his whole mediation nonsense, where he is uh, once again internationalizing the Kashmir issue and bringing third parties into it. So maybe this frank conversation that took place hurt this man's ego and his entire
Also,
game.
sir, he did not get a photo opportunity because the prime minister refused to go to US. There were sources saying that he was invited to come to US while the field marshal was there, so he could have gotten a
Exactly.
photo
Part of his
opportunity.
part of his effort to mediate and bring peace between India and bring about peace between India and Pakistan. So this explains why we've got into this jam at the moment, where let's see what happens on August 27th. Although he's indicated he may not go ahead and impose these additional 25% sanctions, though persons like Peter Navarro are recommending that he do so.
Both the
Uh,
US Trade Secretary Scott Bessent and Peter Navarro, they have taken a very hardline stand and they are pushing for sanctions. But when
yeah.
the even US media asks them about China, they have no answers to give. Whereas, as I see it, before the campaign 2024, his election win, the entire focus was on how to counter China as China was becoming a threat. Somehow, in power, his advisors or his team is not focusing on China, but I believe that the biggest issue for them has become India. He tried to threaten Apple not to manufacture in India, even though that is going ahead. So, everything possible. In that, is there a systematic shift in US's view of India, sir?
Well, let me first address the issue of China. Here,
Hmm.
there's mixed messaging. On the one hand, he said that I want to reach out to Russia and settle this Ukrainian question because Biden was foolish and pushed Russia into the arms of China, and I want to break that link. The subtext being that I want to focus on the Western Pacific, where China is the biggest threat. On the other hand, he's also made a statement that Taiwan is right next to China, and we are 5,000 miles away. So, also, they want to shift the the chip making, advanced chip making from Taiwan into the United States, and Taiwan has agreed to that because they foresee that they may not be able to uh, prevent China from incorporating Taiwan at some stage, and they don't want to be left high and dry where they don't have a source of very high advanced chips, etc., etc. And then he says he wants to have a beautiful deal with China, uh, because China hit back and denied them certain critical materials, which are very vital even for their defense industry. And he also says that he thinks he will visit China by the end of the year because he has great admiration for Xi. Now, the absurdity is this: that when for his inauguration, he Xi was the only person that he invited and announced, not Modi or anybody else.
Mm, mm,
Even when the discourse was that China is our biggest
mm,
adversary and this and that, he sort of wanted to send a signal to China that don't misread my intentions. Please
mm,
come to my inauguration and we'll have a chat and stuff like that.
mhm,
So there are a lot of mixed messaging, which actually creates a lot of uncertainty even in our minds as to what really is his position on China. And then if he has that beautiful deal, then what will be the rationale and logic of treating China as an adversary
mm,
and generating geopolitical pressure on it, which
mm,
then leads us to question his commitment to Quad and the
mm,
entire Indo-Pacific concept. So, i- unfortunately, it's very difficult to understand what Trump is aiming at. He doesn't seem to have any sense of geopolitics other than uh, anything that revolves around tariffs and the US market and bringing in investment from outside into United States and others buying US LNG, and then creating jobs in the United States and manufacturing in the United States, etc., etc. So I think even if we try to uh, use all our experience to understand where this is headed, is very difficult to say. Because once you have a president who's whimsical, who takes decisions himself,
Hmm.
who's not, who doesn't believe in process. He said that the other day. I believe in my instincts. I don't believe in process. Now, when you have a leader of the most powerful country who actually has this kind of an approach to international affairs, then what do you do? How do you carve out an approach and a policy which will allow you to deal a, with him rationally when there is a degree of irrationality in his thinking and his approach and his policies?
So, is that the reason India recently had the foreign minister of China, and now Prime Minister is going there for that meeting? Is India, and do you think it is possible for India to have a decent working relationship with China, especially after Galwan and especially after, because end of the day we have border issues with China, which keep flaring up every decade or so, which have led to a hot border also in Galwan and other places. So, do you think that India trying now to meet China, is that a viable route out for India, or is that a viable path to take, or that is just not going to lead any place?
But before I answer that, there's one comment I'd like to make on what you said that has our relationship with United States broken down.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, Now, certainly there are big issues now in our ties, and there are uncertainties ahead.
Hmm.
But to reach the conclusion that it has irreversibly broken down, I think may not be right. Uh, so we'll have to wait and see because India has a position in the world, the size of the Indian economy, the market that we offer to the world, the rising consumer demand in a country of 1.4 billion, which is rising, uh, where you have Europe, which is where growth rates are so small and the population is so
Population.
small, and China, whose growth rates are going down, and and it's not a consumer-oriented economy. So India has that position, apart from our talent and everything else, especially in areas where United States wants to keep its edge globally in the high
So, but
technology.
mostly India, what I was saying, India has a lot of obviously people of Indian origin in America, but most nations have a pressure group. Whereas I'm talking about the wealthy in America is hardly a pressure group. Most of them are in line with whatever the Trump administration is doing. Do you think that is also a failure of our state networking or creating a pressure group, or is it a situation where those who have become Americans are more Americans now and want to be with Trump rather than taking a nuanced position like some countries do, or expatriates of some countries do, and they still are involved and have a regard for their nation? Because that's not
Look,
happening in this case at all.
I answered the China question after this. The thing is that is there any unity in our country, political unity or unified point of view on our relationship with the United States and the problems that we are facing, uh, or that the government in power has the backing and support of the large majority of the Indian political class? It's not true. There are a lot of dissonant voices who are attacking the government. Sometimes it appears that they have no sense of our national interest, the manner in which the opposition is targeting the government, that always wanting to show up what the failures of the government are, always focusing on that. And it's part of a very vicious internal political competitive process. Now, the same thing is true of our diaspora. There are various opinions. There are people who don't agree with the BJP and its philosophy, anti-Hindu feelings. Uh, lot of the younger Indians are sort of very woke types. They are living in an atmosphere there in the universities and all where wokeism is rampant. So, and then of course, and more importantly, that currently nobody wants to challenge uh, Trump. Everybody is afraid of him because he becomes so powerful. They don't want to take him on, barring some figures here and there.
Mhm.
So, and then the manner in which he's been throwing out people from universities, students, this and that, immigrants, the manner in which Indian immigrants were
Mhm.
sent back, illegal fellows. I think there's a sense of fear. There's a sense of fear. So they want to keep low and they don't want to take up positions uh, in favor of India openly and vocally because they feel that they'll be targeted even
They
more
were
and they about their future, about their green cards and everything else should not lead to a
There was
situation where
recently a news also that he is going to re-examine the H-1B visas and green cards of who are deportable people, in the sense have they done some offense, actively pursue if you have some minor infraction someplace. So that
yeah.
also obviously is contributing to that fear factor.
And the other thing I find is that let's say the honchos, big honchos of a high tech companies in the United States, they are silent
Mm.
because they are worried about their own businesses and this and that. They are very closely tied to the Pentagon. They get a lot of contracts from them, so they are concerned in that regard. And some others who want to curry favor with the Trump administration, uh, they are speaking on behalf of Trump, even saying that India should sort of try and mollify Trump, and he's very very upset and stuff like that, projecting uh, uh, Trump as a kind of a victim of India's um, hard position and unwillingness to bend and stuff like that. But leave that aside. Let's come to China.
So just one more question before China. Do you,
Mm.
because the last example of India-US problems is given as 98 was a low point. So how do you compare this situation with 98? Is it worse? Is it better? Is it similar? What are the parallels and how is it worse or better, sir?
Oh, it's not as no, 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 no. It's not as bad as what happened in 1998. 1998, we did our nuclear test. We challenged the United States on an issue on which they had, which was the core of their geopolitics, that is a non-proliferation treaty, that no other country should
Mhm.
aspire to have nuclear weapons because the entire structure would break down and the United States could then lose control, as they have lost it over North Korea. And they're not able to deal with North Korea because it has nuclear weapons. And if tomorrow so many other countries had nuclear weapons, difficult to assert on the ground. They,
Hmm.
let's say Iraq had nuclear weapons. Do you think they would have attacked Iraq?
No.
So therefore, they took the lead in imposing sanctions on us and mobilized all the G7 countries and others, barring France, to impose these sanctions. We have begun opening our economy in 1991. We have not yet reached the levels of growth that we have reached now. But more than that, we had a huge problem of Kashmir on our hands, terrorism on our hands.
Hmm.
We were afraid that all these sanctions uh, would would actually hurt us deeply. That's why we launched this bond scheme where we got a lot of money from abroad in order to sustain the economic shock of sanctions, etc., etc. It's not as bad as that. It's problematic. It is difficult because it is connected to the whims and fancies of Trump. But don't mind you, there are certain, because the MAGA base, a lot of it is racist and this and that. The Indian community is being now
Hmm.
targeted, and a lot of people are working on this, Islamists and Pakistanis, and everything else. So there's a bit of an issue on the ground, but it's not as bad as 1998. No, no.
So now with China, what India is seeking to achieve with China, is it feasible, sir, or is it just because US situation is that we are making an attempt which will probably lead nowhere?
Well, it's with China, we've always had this double kind of thinking and approach that. China is our biggest adversary, biggest strategic threat. At the same time, it is sitting on our border. It has, meantime, become very strong militarily and economically. Now, the biggest manufacturing power, and the second largest of the exporting country in the world, etc., etc. And we have a lot of dependencies on them, and therefore we have to also engage them. I wrote an article recently. I don't know if you saw that. That our approach is both to resist and engage China. We have to do that. If China was far away from our borders, it would be a different story. And now we have the additional problem, as we saw during Operation Sindoor, that there was
Hmm.
active collaboration between China and Pakistan. Uh, so we have to play this game. And then it began after Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi met in Kazan, uh, broke the ice, following which small steps are being taken to unfreeze the relationship with now this Mansarovar Yatra, tourist visas, resumption of flights, everything else. Uh, so these are small steps. During this visit of Wang, some more significant steps have been taken. There is a 10-point agreement with the foreign ministry, and there is a 10-point agreement with the special representatives. Uh, so there is some kind of a stated willingness to look at settling the border, have a kind of an early harvest, etc., etc. Um, but but the fundamentals of the India-China relationship haven't changed. China is always there, and consistently, and they succeeded during Manmohan Singh's time quite well. That look, this border dispute is a legacy of the past. Let the future generations deal with it, or we can. But let's separate it from the larger relationship, and let's go ahead and develop our ties in all other areas, which we started doing, which explains why we are today the way we are in terms of our dependencies on China. And if you look at the joint statements during that period, some of the things are absolutely shocking. We declared a strategic partnership with China. On what basis? Uh, and we also said that we have no problems. You read that. We have no problems about China being in our neighborhood. And we also said that we will cooperate in the nuclear sector at a time when they have been supporting Pakistan's nuclear program. So we made a lot of concessions, and the Chinese know that if a particular government made concessions at a particular time, it is within the system, it is within the calculus of the system. And therefore, since they have us upper hand on us in so many ways, they think they can move us in that direction. And with the fact that now they see that we are under pressure from the United States, and there is a strong feeling in India against the United States, they want to capitalize on it. They think that this is the time to make some sweet noises and extract more concessions from India without making any significant concessions on their side. Now, trade, $130 billion, our deficit is $100 billion. We've been, I know, we've been pressing them all these years to open up our market, their market to us. Haven't done it. They won't do it. Uh, so our it's a kind of a strategy where we want to. It's a continuation of a strategy where we want to tell the G7 and the West that we want good relations with you. In fact, we are demonstrating that we want good relations with you. Our entire economic thrust, FTAs and everything else, is towards the West or the partners of the West. But we are not going to be put ourselves in a position where we become a tool in your hands, where you get so much control over us that we are unable to make independent choices in our foreign policy, and therefore we will be part of BRICS and we'll be part of SCO and everything else, because these are the organizations, non-Western organizations, which want to actually uh, carve out space for themselves globally outside the traditional Western hegemony and project views and and modalities of cooperation and work in the United Nations for reforms and everything else together.
So
Uh,
what I take from what you're saying is the problem is with China. We have given concessions in the past, knowing that it's our biggest strategic challenge in the region, and it's a perpetual challenge. So what we need to be cautious at this point is we do not end up making further concessions, because there are some rumors that certain apps could start, which is not a big deal, but there are other rumors on that we could do some statement on Taiwan, or we could do something with or trade, or like you said, strategic relationship on nuclear. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. How do we uh, portray to West that we are trying to have a counter also, while not making a concession to China, which knows we are in a bit of a difficult spot?
let me before I answer that, let me say something else. United States treats China as the biggest adversary, and we know that.
Hmm,
Yet
hmm,
they have been always engaging China. China still remains their biggest trade partner, no matter what.
hmm, hmm,
Plus, there are other forms of conversations, though they are having some difficulties. Uh, they remain very equivocal about the Taiwan, so as not to rile the Chinese too much.
hmm,
So, if
hmm,
United States thinks that it needs to engage China in order to have certain stability in their ties, even if they consider them as the main threat,
hmm,
India has to have the same posture,
hmm,
that we have to engage you because you are sitting on top of our head, on top of it.
hmm,
But we will resist you, but we will resist you not in a confrontational manner, but we
hmm,
resist you in our own way through Quad and Indo-Pacific
hmm,
ties with the United States, more defense material
hmm,
equipment from them, underwater sea technology to keep track of Chinese submarines, cooperate
hmm,
with France, also worried about China's maritime strategies and this and that. Now, with regard to some concessions that we make, as it is, as you know, the Economic Survey of India has said that you know we should use Chinese capacities for our industrial growth because whatever it is, we can't turn our backs because they control so much of the advanced technologies and this and that. So that kind of a pressure is there, and it's very difficult for us to move away from that, though we are trying to do, but we are not a command and control system like the
hmm,
China, where the government can direct everybody in the
hmm,
private sector to do exactly what the government wants. We are It'll be a slow process. We are trying to build up our own capacities in certain critical areas to PLI, to this, to that, prodding our private sector to do more in terms of investment in these frontier areas, etc., etc. Uh, China can spend a lot on R&D because it is centrally directed and controlled. We can't do that. We
hmm,
can't tell the private sector that you spend
hmm,
X amount on R&D, etc. So these are the these are the handicaps of having a democratic system and a polity which is based on internal consensus wherever
Sir, what I
possible.
find amusing is we can direct our corporates to have CSR. Technically, in a democracy, government has no business telling a corporate to have a corporate social responsibility fund, but we cannot direct R&D. So our entire strategy is also very often just built towards welfareism and trying to win elections and offload the government's burden, not in strategy. Otherwise, in a democratic country, there is no business of telling a corporate to have CSR. If we
No,
can
but
have CSR, why not have a R&D fund? I'm not saying they
but
should do it, but
yeah, but Iskar, this pressure is coming from came from the WEF. They
mm,
are the ones. They are the ones who are behind this. And you know what the uh, objective behind all this is. The
mm,
part of that wokeism, if you
mm,
might call it. And our companies who want access to foreign funds and this and that, then they
mm,
are met with the demand that show what you have done in terms of
mm,
or you're talking about for
mm,
eligibility, and you get the
mm,
kind of points that you need in order to get
mm,
access to funds. A very vicious thing that has been done
mm, mm,
to get
mm,
control
mm,
over our economy in different ways and
mm,
import their own kind of ideas of welfareism and everything else into
mm,
our system. But leave that aside. Now, with regard to China, on Taiwan, as you know, uh, we have clarified. because China tried to put words into our mouth.
mm,
And
mm,
I was,
mm.
I was of the view that this should not become the new narrative. And then it'll be very difficult to reverse it. And immediately we should give some clarification. So I'm glad that the government clarified. And we saw, in
So,
are concerned in terms of data
data
retrieval.
retrieval.
So, with regard to apps and this and that, I am not aware. But if something can be done, uh, which doesn't create problems about, you know, data retrieval or uh, exploiting our society in a particular way, or using that as a propaganda medium, I don't know. Maybe they can look at it. I have no view on that.
Yes. So now the last part. How important is US ambassador to India? Because your tweet that this is the first time a person has been made a special envoy and additional charge has been given. Earlier, they say that job was Assistant Secretary of State used to handle that, is what one presumes the special envoy would be doing. So, sir, broadly, how important is a US ambassador to India in the context of how US policy is made? Secondly, sir, the special envoy, because the person being made is a person who has no experience of diplomacy, or one might say even of world affairs. Was a MAGA person who joined in 2020 to the Trump campaign, did a job there, became director of personnel, is obviously influential enough because if you are handing out 4,000 jobs in the administration, you will have a significant heft. And then got into a fight with Elon Musk, who called him a snake on a social media platform. And then he responded and all this stuff. So, of course, a person very close to Trump, very close to the administration. If you have appointed 4,000 people, you are going to have links with them. And now is a special envoy. So, how do you see this development? In a sense, is it trying to relink India and Pakistan, which is what Trump's version is when he talks about ceasefire? So, is it a worrisome development for India, and how does India deal with it?
You see, if we didn't have a problem with Trump and we were on a good wicket with him, and the
Mm,
relationship was forward-looking,
mm,
and whatever was agreed, let's say in February in the joint statement, that was going to be the agenda going ahead.
mm,
Then to
mm,
have a man who's close to Trump is an asset because then you have a direct line to the White House. But then
mm,
when you have a very erratic Trump who's targeting India,
mm,
irrationally, squeezing India,
mm,
trying to extract concessions from India which are unwarranted, interfering with our foreign policy, critical areas of our foreign policy, as with Russia, and creating embarrassment, causing us embarrassment on Pakistan, uh,
mm,
inviting the rabid anti-Hindu, anti-Indian field marshal, so-called, of Pakistan
mm,
for a private party is totally unprecedented. Talking about developing critical materials and raw materials and oil in Pakistan, and saying rather offhand that one day Pakistan will sell oil to India and
mm,
get on Kashmir. Then,
mm,
then it's a different story. Then what is then the great advantage of having a man who's close to Trump as ambassador? Because he's going to come here with all the ideas and idiosyncrasies and preferences of,
mm,
of
mm,
Trump, and
mm,
we'll try and push them because Trump has said that he's going to implement my agenda. You look at his tweet, my agenda
mm,
is in bold capital letters.
mm, mm, mm,
We know what his agenda is, the elements of the agenda which make us feel uncomfortable. So is he
mm,
going to implement that agenda? Then if he is going to, then it's a bit of a problem for us. I don't
mm.
think that they're going to not have a uh, assistant undersecretary for South Asia, South and Central Asia. That will be there, but he's a special envoy, uh, which
Sir, if
means
I may
that
put your may I, if I may just put your tweet on this because you wrote a long tweet. It's the first time that a US ambassador to India is also a special envoy for South and Central Asian affairs. This means he will have a much wider mandate covering the jurisdiction of the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs. Ipso facto, he will be supervising India's relationship within the region with Pakistan and with our neighbors. So I found this part rather in a sense, a difficult area for India when you are making an ambassador and giving him for the first time the special envoy status, who is to sit and try to sort out when India has taken a stand, it's all bilateral. So when you are giving him the mandate of special envoy, you are saying it's multilateral. And you want him to sort out this issue, not only with Pakistan, I presume, with Afghanistan also and all that. So is that not a challenge beyond the ordinary? And otherwise, an ambassador close to the president or not close to the president, as you are saying, depends on our relationship with the president. But this mandate, is it in a sense taking us into a new direction? It's never happened before, no matter what the situation was earlier also.
Well, United States, until we had the nuclear deal and the relationship blossomed in many ways, always challenged India's supremacy in the subcontinent, always. And that's why they built up Pakistan against us and supported Pakistan on extremely sensitive issues. Uh, so we seem to be now, the implication of this is that once again, United States has begun to challenge India's supremacy in the subcontinent and not leaving it to India to exert its power, its influence within the region. Uh, in a sense, leaving this region, barring Pakistan, to India to manage, because India is the biggest power in the region.
Mm,
Now, the clear attempt is that we can't leave it to India to be the central figure in deciding central country to decide what's going to happen and what are going to be the developments in this region and what are going to be the external postures of the region and what is going to be the relations between India and its neighbors. United States must have an overseeing role.
mm,
That's where the problem is. That
yes.
the centrality of India, the regional centrality of India,
Mm,
is sought to be watered down, and the United States wants to have a say in how India deals with the region. And the negative features for us is that what Trump is trying to do with Pakistan, and what the Biden administration did in Bangladesh.
mm,
You
mm,
know, weakening seriously our hold on that country um, in a very sensitive part of India, bordering China, Myanmar, and what have you. The United States has been active in Nepal, though not necessarily against our interests, but they have been active in Nepal. Uh, so why? And then the other thing is that since there are now differences between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which
mm,
weakens Pakistan. So when he has this responsibility as special envoy, he will
mm,
try, in line with what Trump is thinking about, attaching more importance to Pakistan, investing in Pakistan, etc.,
mm,
etc., bring about some kind of a reconciliation between Pakistan and Afghanistan, try and deal with this problem of the TPP and what have you. In other words, we have now uh, an unwarranted, stepped up interest of United States in managing this region, which actually they ought to be they ought to leave it to us. They ought to leave it to us largely. But this special envoy business is problematic in that sense. And of course, uh, India, one of the biggest embassies in the world is in India. There were so many consulates there. Look at the extent of our relationship, the breadth of our relationship. He's going to have his hands absolutely full. But now they're giving him this additional charge of
mm,
South, South and Central Asia,
mm,
uh, giving him some kind of uh, an American czar in this
mm, mm,
region.
mm,
Now, he's not going to do all this in the air. He has to talk
mm,
to us. I
mm,
mean, what's the point in being in charge of this region if he's not
mm,
going to actually engage us on these issues with us? But we don't want. Why do we want to engage with him on our relations with Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, or Bangladesh, or Pakistan, or Afghanistan?
mm,
Why
mm,
do we want that? Why do we want that? But he will be compelled to. Otherwise, what does special envoy mean?
mm.
So these are. It's an unusual move, very unusual move. Uh, but let's see how it goes.
So how do you, because in his special envoy role, is he going to have meeting with various foreign ministers and deal with inter-se relationship between India and Bangladesh, for example, or India and Afghanistan, for example, which is not the remit of an ambassador, I presume. An ambassador's remit is his nation as US or India. So once
Absolutely.
that is a normal remit of an ambassador, in this, your remit is different. You are now to deal with internal affairs of or external affairs of India with a third country not being your parent country.
Yeah, absolutely. Now look at what Witkoff as special envoy for the Middle East
Mm,
and for peacemaking, and
mm,
also special envoy in a sense to Russia. Uh, Now, if he's a special envoy for the region here,
mm,
then obviously he's going to engage uh, with those countries. And
mm.
if Pakistan says that these are my problems with India, and you
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
push India in that direction, then
Mm,
what is it for the special envoy? Then he has to
mm,
come and tell that, look, this
mm,
is what Pakistan says.
mm,
And if he goes to Bangladesh and Bangladesh makes
mm,
certain remark or whatever else, or even if it is positive where he accepts that there is a problem in Bangladesh with Islamism, let's for
mm,
the moment deal with that.
mm,
And he goes there, then he has to come and tell us that, look, we want to be able to help you with this and that and that. So point is that he will be injecting himself into our relations with the neighboring countries beyond what we want the United States to do, and it beyond it becoming a problem for us, because we don't want to be subject to an overview of what we do in our neighborhood uh, by the United States in the light of the United States' own regional interests. And of course, the other point which I mentioned in my ex post was that it sort of uh, you know uh, projects India as a regional country in this part of the world, and
mm,
the Indo-Pacific dimension uh,
mm.
gets out of focus. That's also a bit of an issue.
Also, so it depends whether India inject allows him to raise those issues or not. In the sense, you could raise the issue, and if India doesn't respond to the issue with you, which you raise about with Bangladesh or Pakistan, that could then either lead to worsening of relationships, or how does India handle that delicately when he comes with a problem which is purely a Bangladesh problem, and Indian ministry does not act on it. Our bureaucrats are very good with stonewalling. Listen, don't act.
No,
How
no,
does that
no,
situation develop then, sir?
this is speculative, but let me put it differently.
Mm,
This man may be well intentioned, he may be close
mm,
to Trump. Point is, he has no diplomatic experience at
mm,
all.
mm, mm,
He has no experience of the region either.
mm,
So, if it was one of those extremely qualified, experienced American ambassadors
mm,
knew this game and who had served
mm.
in this more than once, and if they came here, then we'll have a much bigger problem because
Really a bigger problem.
he would find uh, ways of handling us diplomatically.
Mm,
Uh, okay, let me put it differently. Bigger problem in the sense that he would be more effective.
mm. Understood.
But an inexperienced man like this, he'll commit mistakes. He'll
Mm,
commit mistakes. It's not easy to understand the sensitivities that are involved unless you have dealt with India for a
mm,
long time. Understood what our problems, what our thinking is. Uh, so let's see. I mean, the jury is out. The jury is out, and we will.
yes.
The layman, he will soon discover the limits of what he can do. But if he gets pressure from Trump
Mm,
to sort out India,
mm,
to give hard messages to India, both bilaterally in terms of tariffs and our economic
mm,
policies, and interfere in our relations with Pakistan,
mm.
then we can foresee problems ahead.
Sensitive times ahead, sir. Thank you for your time on all these issues. And if the difficulties arise, I would request you again to come back in a bit of in a small while and then readdress those issues, sir. Thank you, sir.
So, with pleasure, with pleasure.
Thank you, sir.